Great.
And Janet, you can go ahead and mute your stuff. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're just waiting to get folks into our webinar. And as soon as I see that we have quite a few of you on, we will go ahead and get started. Okay. All right, well, it's been pretty steady for the last several seconds, 15 seconds or so. So I am going to go ahead and get started as people are coming in. And Craig, if you would like to go ahead and at least put on your video, that would be great. And Janet, I'm going to ask you to take care of the Master Gardeners coming in, please. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Spring Gardening webinar series presented by the Central Oregon Master Gardeners, Oregon State University, and our sponsors. Thank you for joining us on, I hope this is a beautiful April day for some of you. Where I am in Bend, it's overcast and sometimes shiny and cloud, but mostly cloudy. My name is Vicki Miner, and I will be your host today. Janet Dart is another Master Gardener, is helping behind the scenes. Our speaker this afternoon is Craig LeHoullier, who you see on your screen. He is going to present an information-packed workshop, taking you through his nearly 40-year adventure with tomatoes. You'll get history and a lot of information about the array of tomato varieties available. He will focus on the particular challenges and conditions in our area, and all of your questions that come up will be answered. Before we get started, I would like to cover some of the housekeeping for the webinar. All videos and microphones are turned off except for the presenters. You have access to the Q&A, and that's where you should put your questions during the webinar. If you like a question someone else posted, hit the thumb to move the question up in the queue. The chat's disabled for the attendees, but if there are links that we need to share with everyone, and there will be, we'll put them in the chat window for you, and you can copy and paste from there to your own computers. They'll also be posted in the Q&A and sent to you by email after the session is over. We'll reserve time at the end to answer anything that was not addressed during the slide presentation. And this is also being recorded, and it will be available online for a short period of time following the session. In a few days, you'll be sent an email with a link to access the recording, and we'll also send you any links that Craig mentions in his presentation. So what is the presentation today? It is Epic Tomatoes from Your Garden. Craig has been an avid tomato grower in several regions of the country, and he's spoken on a variety of gardening topics for 2 decades. He knows our Pacific Northwest region from being best friends with Mike Dunton, the former owner of Victory Seeds in Molalla, Oregon. A chemist by education, Craig developed his passion for gardening early on through his grandfather and his father. He and his wife of 43 years, Susan, started their own gardens in West Lebanon, New Hampshire in 1981. In 1986, Craig joined the Seed Savers Exchange and began his journey through thousands of heirloom tomato varieties. He added amateur tomato breeding in 2005 as the leader of the Dwarf Tomato Breeding Project, growing over 160 new dwarf tomato varieties. His first book, Epic Tomatoes, was published in 2014, and in 2016, he published Growing Vegetables in Straw Bales. So obviously he knows his topic. He is currently working on a book about his work with dwarf tomatoes, and that will be self-published. Although he now lives in gardens in Hendersonville, North Carolina, his tomato gardening education efforts continue to be nationwide. He has worked on a self-paced online course called Growing Epic Tomatoes with gardening podcast host Joe Lampel. And just last month, on March the 21st, Craig was on Joe's podcast, Tomato Talk and Big Gardening and Life Changes. So with that as background for our speaker, I will turn things over to Craig.
Thank you so much. And Vicki and Janet have both been such delights to interact with as we've set this up, and I appreciate all the work that we've done to make this happen. So I'm just getting my slides up, and my relationship to the Pacific Northwest actually goes back to where I was a postdoc at the University of Washington in 1983. We were very poor, but very happy. And Seattle was really inexpensive back then, and we just enjoyed the natural beauty of it. We visited the Pacific Northwest in 2006 when my wife and I finally went back with some expendable income to spend, and we went from Portland up to Mount St. Helens and then drove down to Astoria, to Yachats, and stopping in all kinds of places along the way, crossing over to Corvallis, then back to Portland. And it was extremely memorable. And we've been addicted to Dutch babies ever since. And actually, my last major gardening trip was to Corvallis in 2020 for a big vegetable conference just before COVID hit. And so I got to visit Mike, and it was all really great. So here I am in Hendersonville. Let's get you started. Buckle up, because we're really going to have a lot of fun in this next hour or so. Where is Hendersonville? Well, this is North Carolina. Just kind of wave 3,000 miles to your east and you'll find where North Carolina is. And if you look at Asheville, the dot on the left of this slide, we're about 30 miles south. We use Asheville mostly because it has a Trader Joe. But Hendersonville is a gorgeous area, rural, surrounded by lots of places to hike. So I always like to start off by showing folks what's going on in our yards right now. And our beautiful magnolia is now fading, but it gave us great joy while it was blooming. It is currently, and I apologize for anyone that ends up jealous or unhappy that they're not where I am yet. I know that the audience that I'll be speaking to has a potentially broad range of growing zones, but we are zone 7B, according to the latest update, and we're maybe a week early of where we should be with our flowers, but our azaleas are out, our tulips are out, and we do a lot of hiking, searching for wildflowers, and we're now starting to spot things like trout lilies and trillium, and we're really pleased. As far as my gardening efforts, this is where I'm at in terms of my seedlings. I'm going to talk a lot about timings of planting seeds to get things into the garden at the appropriate time. But I started my seeds around March 1st. I start them in a very unique way that I'll show, but they were separated for the most part into individual pots on right around April 1st. And these are getting ready to go out into the yard around May 1st. And this is what my garden will be. And we'll be talking a lot about what I do with this space, because this is our septic field of our yard, and therefore I have to plant on top. And so it is straw bales and it is containers for me. We do dig in the ground for our flower garden, but for the veggies, it's all growing on top, which has its interesting foibles. So I did prepare a set of 4 questions for you all, and if Vicki and Janet can now launch the poll, you will get to see them and respond to them. But this will give you some, it will give all of us some insights into your gardening experiences. There are 4 of these, so you'll
Yeah,
be able to scroll.
the audience should go ahead and scroll down to see all of the questions if you
All
can't
right.
see them on one screen.
Good. All right, and we look forward to discussing this later in the talk in terms of this will help me get an idea of what people are growing and how that you've done. So that'll be some great things to look through. And I'm going to see if I can, there we go. And the poll froze my screen, which is, so I'm going to try to escape and come back in. Let me try this again now. Sometimes that happens if something launches on the screen. So let's start with where I was going to be. Good, there we go. No
So
need to
Craig,
panic.
you may want to just hang until the poll is closed.
Oh, is that what happens? Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
because we'll end it and then Janet will share it and
Oh,
then we'll
great,
close.
great,
And
great.
you should be able to be back to your thing. So
Yeah. Well, thanks,
anytime.
you guys. And this is where we're going to start when that happens. So everybody vote away, have fun with the questions. Um, I couldn't have the opportunity to put in open-ended questions because then we'd have a zillion different responses, but this will be good enough.
Well, we're doing pretty good. We've got 87% have answered so far.
Great. Great, great.
Yeah, a couple are straggling in here, so we'll give them a few more
Well,
moments.
I didn't make the questions too easy. I used to love multiple choice tests in school because I have a really good memory. And so I was the obnoxious person who would answer the 50 question test in 8 minutes, turn it in, and then go to the Rathskeller to have a beer. Um, the
I
key
think we, I
is,
think we're
go ahead.
about it. So I'm going to go ahead and end it and
Great.
share it.
All right. So
See
look at
that?
this.
You should be able to scroll down,
Yeah.
everybody.
So better than hoped. We've got almost an even split. And what's really nice is the better and met expectations works out to about 60%. And it wouldn't be gardening if some of us didn't have some disappointing seasons. I've been gardening for 40 years, and out of every 10, um, one or two are great. Four or five are pretty good, and then there's always those few that just didn't do it. Interesting here to see almost an even split between hybrids and open pollinated. And we're going to talk a lot about tomato types, which will be fun. Biggest issue, and this is not surprising to me, is yield. And in researching information about growing in your area, this isn't surprising to me. So hopefully we'll be able to share some tactics and have some discussions about how that can improve for you. And we're going to do something about C to see if we can get a few of you to try straw bales, because it's the way that I've really embraced, and I'll tell you why. But look at this: raised beds and containers in ground are pretty evenly split. So it's really good to see a variety of things that people are doing. I think of gardeners as having a tool belt, and some of those tools are all of our different ways to garden: in the ground, in raised beds, straw bales, containers, even hydroponics or greenhouse. And that just enriches our experience as well as brings gardening to a wider variety of people that may not have that perfect garden spot. So here we are, 2024, and we are the most fortunate tomato growers in all of history because of the vast diversity of things we can grow, many of which we'll talk about. However, when I moved into Raleigh, I took this picture in 1992, and this really was the state of tomatoes through much of our history, particularly up to about 1950, when big boy hybrid was the thing, and even up to about 1975, when the Seed Savers Exchange, tomatoes were red. Often they were more appropriate to use as weapons, as for edibles. And I've frozen my screen again. So let me do a stop share, a screen share. We'll go back. Yeah, I think it is just the effect of doing the
You,
poll, and we're on the
you might
move
want to
again.
you might want to turn your video off, and it might help. I like to
Okay.
watch you, but sometimes
Yeah.
that helps with the bandwidth.
Okay, well, let's see. Actually, I don't even see where I don't see anybody right now, but let me try. Let me see.
I meant your
Oh,
picture, your own video feed.
right. So like that.
Yeah, yeah, try that. That might help.
Okay, good. Okay, so we talked about how we're so lucky as tomato growers. I'm going to take you even further back, and let's pretend it's 1840 and you get your seed catalog and you flip to the T because you're one of those rare, intrepid, bold folks who want to grow tomatoes despite the fact that you've heard that they're poisonous, because that was the prevailing thought at the time. You flip to the T's and what do you find? Tomato, no description, one variety. So what made tomato have looked like? And I'm frozen again, Vicky. So I
Well,
tell you what,
I think that Janet, is the poll still
I mean,
open?
Janet.
because Janet, if the poll's still open, maybe you need to close it.
No,
And
it's not open.
okay, because I closed mine. So
One thing I think I'm going to do, I've got two of these open, so I'm going to close that one.
yeah, that could be causing a problem. Just open.
Yes. And then I'm going to open the other one. I think I may have been confusing my computer. So now let's try this.
It's the joys of working from home.
You know, it's just that you never know what Zoom is going to do. So let's go back to this, and now we're going to cross our fingers that everything is going to work, and there we go. So what may tomato have looked like? It probably looked like this, and this is what tomatoes looked like as they made their way from Central America.
Can I interrupt you for a moment?
Yeah.
Because it won't show your screen. We can't see the screen, your video.
Whoa.
Well, we can
you have to have the slide open before you share. So just try sharing again. Sorry.
Oh no, that's fine. So I'm doing screen share, and then I'm opening my,
There you go.
and now you've got it.
Yep.
Okay. And we're working. Can you see that?
Yep. Beautiful.
Good.
Thank you. As much as we practice, something
Oh,
always
no,
happens when you're
that's
live.
fine.
Right.
I think it was, we didn't practice with the poll open, and that's the first time that ever happened. And I think just that activating closed my, my inability to go forward. Anyway, look at this. So how do we find out what tomato may look like? Well, since the tomato made its trip from Central and America and South America to Spain in the 1580s and then made its way through Europe, we look at still life paintings from the 1700s and so. What does that look like? It looks like the ugly heirloom tomato. And it was really what seed companies started with to refine it until we get to the picture that we could have seen. And I took this picture just before we moved from Raleigh to Hendersonville, and all of those red tomatoes now started getting replaced with yellows and whites, oranges, stripes, greens, chocolates, and purples. Much of this is due to the fact that the Seed Savers Exchange formation in 1975 stopped the loss of a lot of our cherished heirlooms, replacing with hybrids. A lot of young seed companies such as Victory got going, and now we are the ones who have all of this vast material to choose from. So, man, I'm sure many of you get fired up on your annual gardening by the emergence of the seed catalogs, filling up your mailboxes that you start flipping through in the evenings. The question is, with 10 or 12,000 or more possible tomato varieties to choose from, if you're a Seed Savers Exchange member and get their big annual phone book, that's what you're confronted with, thousands of varieties of produce. So the first half of this talk, roughly, is going to be a guide for choosing the tomato that will work for you. Now, I want to make this point interesting right up front. This is a really important point. A lot of people have in mind that when you go to a seed company, if you go to one that's near where you live, the likelihood is all of that scene is grown there, and those varieties will be more adaptable to your region. And it just turns out now that seeds are internationalized, the vast majority of seed companies get seeds from anywhere in the world. It is a big business, and the smaller ones like Southern Exposure Seed Exchange and Victory Seed Company, when Mike owned it in Oregon, it has now been sold to his friend Dave Whitinger, and it's being run out of Texas. He's had to source some of his varieties from other countries. Companies like Burpee and Parks and all those, the flowers are grown in certain countries, the peppers are bred in certain countries. So what you do is look for a reliable seed source where the history is accurate, because that is one of the main problems right now with so many people selling seeds. There's a lot of fabrications of histories going on. And later on, if anybody wants to ask me the question, who are my most trusted seed sources, we'll get into that. But you've got some very good local ones in Oregon, such as Adaptive Seeds, who do a lot of their breeding and a lot of their growing seeds right there. So you don't have to buy local when it comes to seeds, because for the most part, you're not going to get local. Just look for the variety that you want. and trust that it will do well in your garden, or it won't. You'll find that out when you grow it. Let's quickly zip through a few really important terms to help you guide your way through your tomatoes to choose. The vast majority of tomatoes are indeterminate, meaning they're going to grow like crazy. They're going to grow up, they're going to grow out. Brandywine, Cherokee Purple, Sun Gold, those are indeterminate. They're great. They have often the best flavor. Some of them have long growing seasons, and if you grow them, you have to figure out a way to keep them under control. Determinants in the upper left, in the upper right, Taxi, Oregon Spring, some of the shorter season ones I'm sure you're familiar with, Roma, the typical sauce tomato. They grow about 3 feet tall. They're perfect for a cage. They put out a burst of blossoms, and then you might as well pull the plant out because they're done. They put out their crop in a very concentrated state. So if you're a canner, if you're a preserver, determinants can be great, but you will not find your greatest flavored tomatoes in determinate varieties. Dwarfs, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, they combine the growth control qualities of a determinant with the long fruiting throughout the season of an indeterminate, but you can put that 3 or 4 foot tomato cage on them and it will keep them under control. Hybrids, what are they? That means that the seeds that you're buying, Sun Gold seeds, for example, come from a handmade cross in a greenhouse somewhere in the world where the 2 parents are kept secret. So hybrid Sun Gold comes, I believe, from an Asian seed company, and they know that if pollen from dad applied to the flowers of mom, and then tomatoes develop, when those ripen, they process the seed and they go in the pack. And that's why hybrids are a little bit more expensive, because there is labor involved in terms of doing the crosses. The opposite of hybrid is actually open pollinated. Those are varieties that may have originated with a cross, but now they've been selected and bred year after year after year until they're genetically stable. And that's pictured black cherry. If you grow black cherry and save seeds from it, you will get black cherry. Heirlooms are a special subcategory of open pollinated that, to me, are the ones in the garden that help you create new gardeners because they have stories associated with them. They have age associated with them. And I like to use that cutoff date I mentioned early on, 1950, when Burpee's Big Boy came out, after which most seed companies bred hybrids. Anything that's open pollinated prior to 1950, I think of as an heirloom variety. Dwarf tomato project varieties, green zebra, which is from the 1970s, black cherry, which is from the 1990s. I call those future heirlooms, but at this point, to me, they're open pollinated tomatoes. So this is what you can do if you grow heirlooms. You can tell a story to someone who's touring your garden that may want them to become a gardener, or at least entice them into the background of this variety. And I'm very fortunate to have been the person who was sent the seeds of an unnamed variety that I named Cherokee Purple, and now has gotten around a little bit, shall we say. And when I got the seeds in 1990, this is the letter that came with it. And they were from a Sevierville, Tennessee man named J.D. Green, who knew that I liked to collect tomatoes. It turns out Mr. Green got them from a woman named Jean Greenlee in Rutledge, Tennessee. She was handed down those seeds from her grandfather, also in Rutledge, and it was he in the late 1800s that received the seeds from the Cherokee Nation members. So when Mr. Green sent me these seeds, this is the first time I had seen a tomato of this color. The whole black tomato craze, the purples and the browns, was not known at that time. It was absolutely delicious. So I thought it needs to get out there. So I listed it in the Seed Savers Exchange and people requested samples, but I also sent it to Jeff McCormick of Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, and he grew it. And he called me the next year and he said, it's a delicious tomato. It's got an interesting history. I love the name, Cherokee Purple. It is ugly. It is so ugly that people aren't just going to accept growing and eating, particularly a tomato of that color. But I'm going to list it in my 1993 seed catalog with a caveat, only for the very adventurous. And the rest is history. So this tells a few things. Americans can be induced to eat food that's a little bit different than what they expect it to look like. But it also exemplifies the fragility of heirlooms, where if any of the links in that chain, from the Cherokee Nation giving it to Grandpa Greenlee to Jeff McCormick selling it in his seed catalog, we wouldn't have it today. That to me is the joy of heirloom gardening. Being able to preserve something for the future, being able to build community by sharing seeds and plants. And it's just a wonderful experience, being able to turn your garden into a place where you can tell people stories. So this is one of those slides I've added because cherry tomatoes tend to be more short season varieties. So Sun Gold, which out of the 4,000 or 5,000 tomatoes I've tasted in my 40 years of gardening, is still #1 in my flavor list. And Egg Yolk, which is a beautiful, larger yellow cherry-sized tomato with excellent flavor, but also multiple use because it's meatier. And I like to use egg yolk to put on a skewer and grill and to chop up and make pico de gallo, to make different salsas from. Both of those come in quite early in the garden. So for those of you that are in really short season growing areas, these would be the the types of tomatoes that I would lead you toward. And I've actually made this list for you, and you will see after the name of the tomato where I've designated particularly early. Days to maturity is a really tricky thing with tomatoes because there is such a dependency on how big the seedling is when you put it into the ground, and then the degree days, what the weather is going to be like for that plant, how many hours of sun it gets, how warm does it get, what is the soil temperature. But relatively speaking, many of these are on the early side, and these are indeterminate, delicious, tall growing ones. I think tomatoes like Cherokee Purple, Green Giant, Polish, Captain Lucky, Ever Purple Ball, Cherokee Green, Cherokee Chocolate, even though I don't designate them early, in warm seasons, I've had them come in quite a bit earlier than I have anticipated. So if you can get them off to an early start into soil that has been warmed and have it and be able to control the environment a bit, those to me are just simply the best flavored. They're in my top 10 to eat. However, Kimberly, a very similar variety would be Stupice, which is a medium-sized potato leaf scarlet red tomato, very sweet and delicious, incredibly early. Sun Gold and Egg Yolk, which I've mentioned. Mexico Midget, which is literally the size of a pea or a blueberry, and is always my first tomato, often 40 days or less from transplant. And it's incredibly delicious for its size. Victory Seed Company is the only reliable seed source for that variety aside from me, because I think it's very closely related to the original Mexico tomato, the tiny one that was grown in Central and Mexican America, because it doesn't germinate like other tomatoes. It's very stubborn, but I've discovered a treatment that I put it through that helps it germinate normally. Black cherry, which is on the early side, and my favorite determinant, which is taxi. It is really early. It's about a 4-ounce to 5-ounce canary yellow, really good flavor. So now I want to spend a few minutes on the dwarf tomato breeding project. This was a really special project that I jumped in with Patrina, my friend in Australia, to answer the question that I had from so many of my seedling customers: what have you got that tastes great and is interesting and I can grow it in a container? In 2005, the answer was not a whole lot. So we put a project together. I formally ended it in 2023, but it's still ticking on. A few of us are finishing up loose ends. So it's been running 19 years. We've had 1,000 people or more join us, amateurs, volunteers. The pay is awful because it's zero. People do this because they're drawn to doing citizen science. And I call this project crowd breeding because we're taking the talents of many, a crowd of gardeners, to breed new tomatoes. Every state has had at least one volunteer, 25 different countries. We have 157 varieties in the Victory Seed Company catalog and counting. There will be more. Every tomato on this cutting board, some of these reach 16 ounces, is from a plant that is 3 to 4 feet tall and can be grown with great control in a small cage. And here they are. So they have a unique growth habit. They're not indeterminate, they're not determinate, they're dwarf. It is a third major tomato genetic type. The dwarf gene gives it a thick central stem. It gives it dark bluish green foliage that has a crinkliness to it that's called rugose. What makes it distinctive is they grow vertically at 1/2 of the rate of indeterminates. So if you end up at the end of your season with an 8-foot Cherokee purple, your dwarf will be 4 feet tall. And you'll be seeing in the rest of my talk some orange text that I've amended my talk to put in things that I want to talk about just for you. There is a great maturity range amongst those 157 dwarfs, as you'll see. So I wanted to highlight a few just for the diversity of what we created. Dwarf Sweet Sue, which is one of my very favorites, and I named it after my wife, who is my very favorite. Dwarf Speckled Heart, which is a 6 to 8 ounce scarlet heart with gold stripes. I used the indeterminate variety Speckled Roman to breed this one. Fred's tie-dye looks just like Cherokee Purple that has been painted with gold and green stripes. And Uluru Ochre is a new color. It is a black-orange tomato. It's got the dusky coloring of Cherokee Purple and Cherokee Chocolate, but it's orange, and it's really, really delicious. We are now starting to work on a variety of cherry tomatoes, the first of which has been released as Dwarf Eagle Smiley on the right. And this is one those of you in your area should really take note of because it is very early, very productive, and its flavor rivals Sun Gold in excellence. It's not quite there yet, but it is really delicious. And these are some pictures of our earliest dwarfs. We're talking 55 or 60 days from transplant at most for first fruit. Dwarf Arctic Rose, Dwarf Yukon Quest, Iditarod Red. These three are actually bred from our volunteers using their greenhouse gardens up in Alaska, and Sean's Yellow Dwarf. And Victory actually has a page that you can filter in different ways, alphabetized, for example, which is the way I like to look at it. And they have all 157. And I've written the descriptions for all of them, and I've even gone in and rated just about all of them that I've grown myself, which is probably about 130 of them. I still have about 27 that I haven't gotten to yet, but our volunteers did all the work on it. And I'm honest, I'll give it 3 stars if I think it's interesting and pretty, but not the best to eat. I really go for flavor. And here is my suggestions for dwarf tomatoes for you, because these by far are the quickest to ripen and still give you really good fruit size and really good flavor. Sleeping Lady is chocolate in color, about 4 ounces. Glorious Treat is an 8-ounce yellow-red bicolored heart, while Spud Leaf an 8-ounce purple. Iditarod Red, a 4-ounce red. Yukon Quest and Arctic Rose are 6-ounce pinks. And on and on. You can see the descriptions of these. I think Pink Passion and Lemon Ice are particularly interesting because they yield very heavily, and they're 6-ounce, beautiful heart-shaped, Pink Passion being pink and Lemon Ice being a very bright yellow. So this will be, you can see this after the fact. You can take a picture of this screen if you want, but this really is your guide for looking at those 157 dwarfs, which ones maybe to start experimenting with to see if they work with your growing season. And we're just about to shift into culture, growing conditions, troubleshooting, how to make this all work. But I wanted to spend a little time on a fun topic. Do colors and flavors of tomatoes correlate? And after my 4,000 to 5,000 tomatoes that I've grown over 40 years, I can put my hand on my heart and say, there is no correlation. Each tomato is a unique set of genes. You know, we all have blue eyes or brown eyes, and blonde hair or red hair or brown hair. Tomatoes can have different colors, but that color is not linked to the flavor they exhibit. And I want to take you through 3 of my favorite color categories and demonstrate this to you. So let's say that you are someone who likes a really sweet tomato. You know, the acidity doesn't jump out and kind of tingle your tongue, but it's mellow and it's a delightful sweet experience, like a fruit. So Anna Russian, and if you look on the right, I will mark some in orange that are short season. and they're really good ones to try for your area. That Anna Russian, which was sent to me in 1988 by a woman who lived in Corvallis, Oregon, named Brenda Helenius, and it's been one of my favorite heirlooms ever since. A 6-ounce pink that's early and just incredibly good flavored. You've got White Queen, Ever Purple Ball, which is in the lower left, and it's perfect 4 to 6 ounce tennis ball shaped tomatoes with no blemishes whatsoever. Kellogg's Breakfast in the upper right. Many people love that tomato. That may be a bit of a long shot for those of you who are in the shorter season zones of the group that's watching this, but it's a beautiful orange sweet tomato. And then the big yellow red beefsteaks, which to me have the texture, the color, and the flavor of a peach, such as Ruby Gold. And you've got German Johnson, which is actually the only well-documented North Carolina heirloom tomato. Now we get into my category. So I love intensely flavored tomatoes that, these are the ones that I dream about over the winter because they fill your mouth, the flavor lingers, and you just can't wait to slice them up and eat them instead of cooking with them because the flavors it's like great dark chocolate. You really don't want to cook with the best dark chocolate because it's just so good to eat as it is. That's the way these tomatoes are. Lillian's Yellow Heirloom, Dwarf Barrel Beauty, the flesh of which stays green when ripe, and it's one of the absolute best flavored. And you see I've got it in orange, so it's a shorter season variety. Nepal in the lower left looks like a grocery store tomato. It just so happens to be the heirloom tomato that converted me from a hybrid grower to an heirloom grower when I first grew it back in 1987. It was introduced by Johnny Selected Seeds. They still sell it. It is spectacular. And one of our dwarfs that is a Cherokee Purple Dead Ringer, Rosella Purple in the lower center, and Cherokee Chocolate on the lower right. Now, the last category before we get into tomato culture is the tart tomatoes. And when I was selling seedlings, this is the category a lot of people ask for. Typically the older gardeners who remember tomatoes as being more acidic tasting when their grandparents gave them tomatoes from their garden. And that flavor is a bit more challenging to find, but it is existing, such as Tiger Tom and Green Zebra, which are shorter season varieties that could do very well for you. And the other one in the upper right that is in orange text is Ozoichka, and that tomato comes from Russia. It made it into the Seed Savers Exchange collection in 1990, and it is one of my favorite yellow tomatoes to grow ever since. And man, is it tart. But it's not unidimensional. There is great tomato flavor behind that tartness, so it's just refreshing to eat, as is the white dwarf, Dwarf Mr. Snow in the lower left, and a tomato that's the same color as Kellogg's Breakfast, but in the total opposite spectrum of flavors, because this one is really tart. So that's hopefully a little bit of help for you in deciding what you may want to grow. When those seed catalogs to come in, you have now an understanding of the growth habit and what you can handle, of whether you want to tell stories with your garden and save seeds and share them, in which case you would focus on heirlooms, or you really want to focus, you need productivity and you need disease tolerances or resistances, so you'd focus on hybrids. Now, how do we make this all happen? And I'm going to take you on a trip of tomatoes from seed to harvest, and there will be some rule breaking involved, such as this picture. And this is just the dense planting technique that I talk a lot about with Joe Lample, and he talks a lot about and uses it now. This was born out of necessity in the fact that I don't have a greenhouse and I wanted to sell seedlings in the Raleigh Farmers Market. So I figured out a way to create a lot of tomato plants in a very small space. We're going to linger just a little bit on the next 3 slides because the major key to tomato success, it is all about understanding the dates and the weather, meaning the temperatures of your soil, primarily air temperatures, and the key temperature being what is the last frost date. Now, I know you can always get surprised, and the weatherman, of course, always has an error bar with their forecast, but knowing roughly when you can get your plants in the ground allows you to work back to where you're going to start your seeds. And then understanding when that first frost is likely to come in helps you understand which types of tomatoes to target in terms of days to maturity from seedling. So that's really, really important. The other really important thing about the weather and its effect on tomato success, and it's two things, heat and cold. The first of which is when that sun is blazing and the temperatures get over 90 degrees, especially for an extended period, and then the humidity may start to come in. If you look at that picture on the right, there are tomato blossoms missing. It looks like that Y. And you may think it's bugs or critters, but what it is blossom drop. And this is probably a large fruited variety. And when the flowers were open, it experienced a period of humid weather where the temperatures were 90 or above. The pollen doesn't flow from the anthers to the pistil, and the flower just doesn't pollinate. And what it does when it can't pollinate is it shrivels up and drops off. It's nothing wrong you did as a gardener. It's nothing that invaded your garden. It's the plant was not happy at that point in time with its weather conditions. But heat also, and I think we're all in shifting zones. So we went from a 7A to a 7B in the last few years here. When I was in Raleigh, we went from a 7 to an 8. So fruit set is affected. Disease, where diseases are, is affected, which ones show up, which ones come in, the intensity of them. The critters that roam through your garden could get affected, and how you care for your plants will be affected because you'll want to help them through the stress of heat. Then, of course, you've got the effect of chilly conditions. Some varieties, whereas the large fruited beefsteaks have trouble setting fruit in really hot weather, they may also have trouble setting fruit in cooler weather. And that's why the smaller tomatoes, like cherry tomatoes up to golf ball size, are a little bit more adapted to a wide range of conditions. They don't seem to be as fussy about their fruit set. And that answer that so many people gave, yield is going to get impacted for sure on the impacts of weather. So what makes for a happy tomato plant? Because when I was thinking about how do I customize my knowledge of tomatoes for different areas, and the way to do it is to help everyone understand what it is that makes a tomato plant do well. And tomato plants will thrive if their roots are warm. In fact, it's really interesting. The roots will still grow, but I'm sure many of you've noticed if you put a plant in the ground and the ground is still cold, the plant won't die, but the top really doesn't advance much because the top really needs the warmth to grow. So the roots will grow and the plant will establish itself, but it won't take off until you get warmth. Tomato plants need adequate water. Now, this is a particular concern for container and straw bale gardening, where the only water those plants can get at is the root zone. It's whatever is in the confines of the container. Whereas in ground grown plants, the roots can spread out and reach. So, the whole thing about dry farming tomatoes to conserve water and to intensify flavor, that really applies to tomatoes that are grown in the ground. If you were to try that with container grown tomatoes, you'll have tomatoes that will have a lot of blossom end rot because of the stress. You need good drainage because tomatoes hate wet feet, and I'll have a picture to show that in a moment. Tomatoes that are planted in ground that doesn't drain well and the roots are sitting in water will look just like they need water, but they're actually suffocating. Tomatoes are reasonably heavy feeders, and they will reward you with healthy foliage and lots of blossoms and lots of setting fruit with regular feeding. But I think the most important bullet point on this list is regular attention, meaning spend time with your tomatoes, read the tomato plants. Wilting implies something, foliage color implies something. This is when you find the critters chewing on your plants. So I think this is a template for success for gardeners anywhere that you can customize for your own particular growing zone. Size does matter when choosing varieties for your particular garden, because to grow big 1.5 to 2 pound mortgage lifters, you need 8 hours or more of sun a day. Whereas If you only have a spot on your deck or patio that gets 2 or 3 or 4 hours of sun a day, if you've got a lot of shade in your yard, you can grow cherry tomatoes, golf ball size saladette tomatoes, maybe up to 6-ounce or tennis ball size tomatoes. But it's a continuum. The larger the fruit size, the more hours of direct sun you need for success. So if you think back to my calendar, I talked about getting a plant out date, and that's when you're reasonably certain that the frost is done for your area. And that is understanding in all of the reading I've done that you can get frost right up until July. You do have to get them out there at some point, after which you would use a protective measure if you have a bad night coming up. But it takes a month to go from a transplanted seedling to plant out. Working backwards one more month, that's when you plant your seeds. So for me, my plant out date is roughly May 1st. I plant my seeds on March 1st. I do my transplanting April 1st. And I've been doing it this way for a long time, and it works great. A few things about seed starting. You want to use a really good quality sterile seed starting mix. And my go-to products have been SunGrow Propagation Mix or their Metro Mix 830. And usually this is about $15 for a 2.8 cubic foot bag. It's great stuff. It absorbs water well, it's sterile, you don't get any damping off disease. It may not be the easiest thing to find. So if you go through to the SunGrow website and look for a distributor in your area, you should be able to get to a greenhouse that carries it. But there are a zillion other products. Pro Mix, each seed company sells their special mix. But seed starting mixes are peat moss and some shredded bark and some vermiculite and some perlite that absorb and keep water well, but they tend to not have any agents in them that will stimulate the growth of a fungus that will harm the young plant, like damping off. One thing I want to note here is tomato seeds actually last many years, just stored behind me. I've got stored many coin envelopes of seeds, and without refrigerating, you can get 12 to 14 years off, whereas germination will start to drop off a little bit at maybe year 12, but you're fine. So if you buy a packet and it has 50 seeds in it and you only need to use 5, well, the other 45 will be good for another 12 years. If you put that in a plastic baggie, put them in your fridge, you'll get 20 years or more. If you put that baggie in a freezer, you'll get 50 years or more. So this is a good thing about saving lots of seed and sharing it. And also, I plant very thickly. This is my dense planting technique. I plant 25 to 50 or more seeds per cell, and I do this to tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, lettuce, greens, beets, flowers, herbs, and you'll see what the result of that is. But this allows you to get 2,000 or more seedlings in a 1 by 2 foot footprint. All you need is a heat mat, and I'll show you what this ends up looking like. So I plant my seeds, I fill my plug flats with the mix, I water it, I surface sow, and then I barely sprinkle mix on the top so I just can't see the seeds anymore. I mist and I put a loose piece of plastic wrap on it, and then I flip that every day. These are on seed mats. The sunny window isn't necessary because tomato seeds don't need light to germinate. But what happens is the plastic is removed once they're up. And by doing the shallow planting and using the heat mat, the vast majority of my seeds are up in 4 to 5 days. And once they're up, you do remove the plastic, but there they are. So these seeds were planted February 28th, and this is the view on March 6th. You'll notice that there are some blanks, and that's fine. That was maybe older seed, or it just doesn't germinate anymore. But at some point, you have to get the plastic off, or else you'll be building up too much moisture in there. They can only stay in front of this window for a short while because they'll start exhibiting phototropism. So this is when you need to move them under some sort of lights. And these are, I'm an old-fashioned kind of guy, and I still have a supply of the old-fashioned fluorescents that run cool. And you can lower them to where the surface of the seedlings is within an inch of the lamp, and that will keep the growth rate from getting leggy. What I do more and more now is on a day where it's in the 40s and there's no wind and there's no rain, I put them in filtered sunlight for an hour, then I move them in. and the next day they get 2 hours, and then maybe day 3 they get some more direct sun. By the end of the week, they're out in direct sun, and you can actually harden them off this way before you even separate them out. Of course, threat of frost, they would come indoors, and I don't like my young seedlings to be exposed to really high wind or really heavy rain. But this saves you time, because once you harden off a seedling, even before you separate them out, you don't have to go through the process again. So when you do put these into single pots, they're already hardened off. How does that work? I use the same material I use for seed starting. I use strips of 18 plastic pots that are about 3.5 inches wide that are perforated, so they're easy to pop apart. I transplant into dry material because once you water it, it develops more surface tension, and pressing the seedlings in could snap the stem. But doing it this way, you just lay the seedling. You can see in the upper left, there's the roots in the seedling. Just lay them on the dry mix and ease them in with your finger until all of the stem is covered. And any of that stem that's under the planting mix will root and create a stronger plant. And I do this to tomatoes and peppers and eggplant and greens and you name it. So a lot of people have asked me, do I deep plant everything on transplanting? The answer is absolutely yes. You want to water these very well and put them in a place where they can rest out of the sun for about 3 days. They'll be fine. I'll raise my garage door and let them get a little indirect sun in the late afternoon. Make sure they're well watered, and then pick a cloudy day and put them out. And within a month, you'll have nice, healthy 4 or 5 inch seedlings that are ready to be donated to gardens, planted in your garden, sold, given away. So I want to get into some key garden success factors. This is in-ground gardening, and this is the side of our house in Raleigh. I hand dug a garden out of red clay, and it was a pain in the neck. But until the trees around the garden grew, I had great success. The reason I moved to our driveway, which you'll see in a moment, is that's where the sun shone. But what can happen in a traditional garden? I talked about this earlier. If you have a substructure of your garden that water drains very slowly from, your little tomato hole is going to get filled up with water and your plants will be very unhappy. So make sure that you fix your drainage issue by loosening up that soil, working in compost, or even creating a raised furrow down the road, planting the tomato into the top of that so the excess water drains out. Mulching is extremely important because it builds up heat, it retains moisture, but the most important thing mulching does is it keeps soil from splashing on your lower leaves. And there are just a host of tomato diseases that are all in the form of different types of spores that could be in your soil. For tomatoes, the most problematic ones are things like early blight and septoria leaf spot. And that's why if you don't mulch your plants after a heavy rain, the sun comes out, you may start seeing little speckles on your lower foliage. It's inevitable you're going to get those eventually, but don't hasten the process. Now use untreated grass clippings. You could use shredded leaves. Whatever allows the plant to breathe and whatever allows water to go through is just fine. It's really important to water the plants at the bottom of the plant where the water is going to get to where it's needed, which is the roots. What happens on overhead watering? You're getting the foliage wet, which means it's a magnet for different tomato disease fungi that are blowing through the air. The majority of the water is not going to reach where it needs to get to, which is the root zone. If I'm in the ground, I water when the plant tells me it needs water. So maybe it's every week. If you're getting rain, maybe it's every 2 weeks. If I'm in a container, I'm often watering daily when the plants are getting really big and really thirsty. And same principles on feeding. I'm not a fancy feeder. I just use a water-soluble balanced plant food, 1 tablespoon per gallon, and each plant gets about 1.5 cups per week. I don't do a lot of changes from high nitrogen to high phosphorus. I just use a general all-purpose on my plants, and they grow well, they flower well, they set fruit well, and they taste really, really good. So for some slides I added for your benefit, and these aren't from my garden, but they're from friends' gardens through the years. You probably know about these. you need to protect against surprise frost. So a few things you can do. Number one is warm the soil up by putting a dark material type of a fabric on it before you plant, because tomatoes, peppers, eggplant do like warm roots. When you get your plant in, you can use a device like this, which picks up the heat of the day and the water that fills these tubes and then radiates it back at the plant at night. So this plant is popping at the top, but typically you wouldn't see the plant because it's being protected. And even if you were to get some degrees of frost in the outside, just the heat rating from those water-filled tubes will protect your plant. And of course, there's cloches you can build. You can garden in a greenhouse and take your plants out on a nice day. If you've got your tomatoes caged, you can wrap them in a floating row cover or a material such as that. And there's different names for it now. What I would not use to cover plants with is plastic, because if the plant leaves touch the plastic, the foliage will freeze. You can use like inverted pots, but make sure you cover the hole in the top just to prevent the cool air from getting in. But these are all season extenders, and these are all ways to, if you've gotten your plants out a little too quick, of course, you've got to protect them from frost. So let's now dance into the area of container gardening. We're probably going to go about 10 minutes over, but I'm here for as long as you need me. Anything works for containers. The key is that it holds soil and that it has holes at the bottom. Plastic, terracotta. I love to use the black plastic grow bags, which are from Peaceful Valley Organic, which is in Albany, Oregon. Their website is groworganic.com. And I've used these for up to 15 years. So I'm not putting a lot of plastic back in landfills. I'm just using what I buy. Self-watering containers such as earth boxes are great, because you have the reservoir of water and the wick, and so you can fill that reservoir up and take a week's trip and come back, and the plants will probably be fine, because the plant will wick up just what it needs and it won't have the wet feet. Drip irrigation, of course, is a fantastic solution for container gardening, because you can put transmitters on each plant and titrate in just what they need. What I use in my containers is a roughly 3-to-1 mix of a good quality soilless mix. I go to Lowe's or Home Depot and get like Stay Green Planting Mix. I don't use bags that say garden soil or potting soil, because I don't find the plants do very well, even though they're inexpensive. And I use composted cow manure as the one of the 3-to-1 mix. And I do reuse the planting mix as long as the plants do well. So even though you should rotate your tomatoes, I don't think you have to rotate them every year. It depends on how they're doing. If all of a sudden you get a soil-borne disease like Fusarium or Verticillium in the ground, then you do have to rotate. But a lot of the airborne things like early blight and septoria will actually die off in the winter. And if they reattack your plants the next year, they're coming in from elsewhere. This is my Raleigh garden that when we lived there, and the homeowners association was driven crazy by this, but I found you can actually kill them with kindness by just giving them plants and produce. And we would have up to 250 plants in our driveway. It got really good sun. We'd pick a ton of produce and really enjoy it. So now, instead of the driveway gardener, I am the septic field gardener here in Hendersonville. A few things about straw bale gardening. It's the equivalent of 2 20-gallon containers of perfect loam. To make it work, you have to get them turned into a compost bin by using periodic applications of high nitrogen with watering in between. It takes about 2 weeks to get through the process, and then you put a 10-10 ton type food on, water that in. 2 weeks from the time you start, you're ready. They produce mushrooms. They're great for gardening with children because they look really cool. And look at how fast the plants grow. These tomatoes went in last year on May 8th as 3-inch tall seedlings. This is what they look like 2 weeks after planting. What's happening is heat is being generated in the center of the bales with all of the composting that's going on. And that I was picking summer squash last year, 37 days from direct seeded. So you can actually prep your bales, put a 3-inch layer of potting mix on the top, direct seed into them, and plant things like squash, cukes, beans, and melons. And that heat in the middle will just really push your plants along. And this is what my septic field backyard garden looked like, looking down my tomato columns, 2 indeterminate plants per straw bale with 8-foot stakes. And at one point in the season, I was harvesting 125 pounds a day. Suckering strategy. Indeterminate tomatoes will sucker everywhere a stem meets a leaf joint. Unless you're using a big wide cage, you need to remove probably all but 2 or 3 or 4. It's up to you to determine how you're staking your tomatoes, how many you want to leave grow. They don't suck energy from the plant. They're actually very useful. And for your purposes, you could root some suckers and bring them along. And if you do have a surprise late frost, you then have replacement plants. All you need to do is put a sucker in a glass of water, and within a week it roots. Put it into potting mix and just bring those along as a just in case. And you also can use these to share. They will be clones of the parent plant. You can share with friends and neighbors and family. So what happens if you don't sucker or top your plants when they get to the top of the stakes? You get the pickup sticks garden. This is from 2020, my first garden here, and I did not top or prune very well. Then when I did the course with Joe Lample, which is all video, I practiced what I preached, and I was really being good about suckering and topping, and my plants were very well behaved. Just a few things about diseases and issues. Early blight is a bullseye pattern. Septoria are speckles. They are ubiquitous. They blow in, they attach themselves to damp tomato foliage. I don't spray. I just remove the foliage that has the blemishes because the spores of the disease are on the flip side of the leaf. And just by removing the blemished leaves, you can control the spread. They will not kill the plant if you keep up with it. Early blight on the left has that bullseye. If you have something that looks more like what's on the right, where you have like a ghostly aura around the brown patch, you have late blight. It's rare, but it's devastating, and your plant has to go because it will spread like wildfire. Typically, that comes in from infected potatoes growing nearby. The conditions are just right, and the spores blow in. Probably the most devastating thing you can have aside from late blight is fusarium wilt. And what happens with that is your plants are growing beautifully. One day you notice they're wilting even though they're watered. The next day you notice the leaves are turning yellow. You want to pull that plant. The disease is in the soil in that location. So you can't plant tomatoes in that location for 3 to 5 years after that, but you can put a piece of landscape fabric on top and put a straw bale or a container there if it's a really nice sunny spot. Anything you can do to keep the roots out of that infected soil, and then given a few years, it will just burn itself out. Tomato hornworm, if they're nice and green and juicy, like the big guy in the middle, remove it because it eats fast and it eats a lot. Maybe put it in your bird feeders. If they've got the little white wasp egg pupa on them, leave them because those pupa will hatch and eat the worm from the inside out, and they'll infect all of the other hornworms in your garden. And if you can't find them, go out in the night and amaze and astound your neighbors with a UV flashlight, a black light, and your foliage is purple, but your hornworms will be bright fluorescent green, and hopefully your neighbors won't call the police on you. 2 physiological issues. Blossom end rot on the left is a pain, but it is from stressed plants, and the stress prevents calcium from getting into the plant to do what it needs. So if you keep your plant stress-free, you will almost completely eliminate blossom end rot. Cracking is from leaving your tomatoes on the vine until they fully ripen, and then you water or you get rain, and the tomatoes absorb too much water for the skin cells to divide to handle, and they pop. So pick your tomatoes half ripe. The bottom parts are colored, the top halves are green. Bring them in the house. They'll ripen in 2 to 3 days, and they will taste indistinguishable from vine ripened, and you will get longer shelf life. You will eliminate cracking. So all 4 of these were picked at half ripe. If you don't, if you let them hang on the vine, this is when you get this issue. And these tomatoes are going to be very perishable because those cracks will allow air to get in, and then the fruit flies will find them and they'll not smell very good. So here we are living in this wonderful time with all of these tomatoes to grow. And you know what my favorite thing is to do with them? This is favorite thing number one. Slice them on a plate. I sit with my wife and I say, okay, Sue, let's start at noon and work ourselves clockwise and let me know what you think about them. Because we all taste things differently. And that way we can each understand if we like sweet tomatoes, tart tomatoes, if such and such is a bland tomato. But it's just a lot of fun. And if you want to really spice it up, do some blind tastings, because we do eat with our eyes, and a blind tasting will really change your perception of things. My favorite thing to cook with tomatoes is to cut them into pieces, seed them, put them in a slow, like a 250 oven for 3 hours, a little olive oil and salt, pepper, and then bake them into this tart that has goat cheese or feta cheese and pine nuts and fresh basil, Parmesan cheese, and lemon peel. And if anybody wants this recipe, I'll be happy to share it. This is a roasted tomato crostata. The crust is extremely easy to make. This is one of the best things I've ever eaten. So I get the pleasure and the privilege of speaking to you all because my grandfather, Walter, on the left, and my dad, Wilfred, on the right, would bring me into their gardens when I was 2, 3, 4 years old and plant the seed that developed into what I like to do now. So your job is very simple. It's to grow a gardener. Share your love and passion and information with people so that they want to do it as well. You can get my books pretty much anywhere, but if you want signed copies, you can email me and we can work that out. And this is how you can reach me. It's my website, my email. I'm starting to do weekly Instagram lives for my garden out here. Eventually it will settle on Fridays at 3 o'clock my time. That's a link to the course Growing Epic Tomatoes, and my Dwarf Tomato Project book is underway. I'll self-publish it. Once again, to Vicki and Janet, thank you for the invitation to speak to the group. I hope everybody got a little something out of it, and now I'm really happy to sit here and take whatever questions you may have. But thanks.
Okay, Craig, I'm coming back on, and people definitely want your recipes. So I
Great.
think
I'll send that to you.
Yeah,
actually,
if you send it to me, I can send it out with the other stuff. We're sending all of these links that he had here in a follow-up email, and I'd love to include that recipe with it.
well, and also what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to put those links in the Q&A for the person who asked about the recipe. I'm putting in the website, your email address, the ways that they can reach you. So that will be in there, and I'm sending that out, and that's in the Q&A, folks. So for some reason, Janet, I could not paste that to the chat. So Craig, there were several questions that let me just go there. This was amazing. First of all, thank you.
It's fun. I told you to buckle up because what I try to do, I wrote most of Epic Tomatoes in 2012 and 13, and it's now 2024. Having the opportunity to do these talks allows me to make the book live, and I can provide updates to things that I've learned since then. So it's really a great opportunity to kind of bring the book alive to people. So I appreciate all of your patience I can talk a lot and I can talk fast, but it's fun to share. It's really fun information to share.
Well, it was really good information. I was taking a lot of screenshots, I have to tell you. Just going through some of the questions that we've got here. Blossom end rot. This is from Elizabeth, that blossom end rot ruins her tomato crop annually. And since you just addressed that, she would like to know if you have some suggestions for overcoming that.
Yeah, I think just if you can pay attention to your plant and give them sufficient water so they don't wilt on a hot afternoon. So if you were to go out in your garden on the hottest days of the year and look at your plant, and if they're still vigorous and really growing well, Then you would probably want to think about doing a soil test to make sure you have sufficient calcium. But the vast majority of soil has enough. It's just that, so when you think of what a tomato is doing, at certain points of its life, it's growing, putting out leaves, putting out stems, flowering, pollinating, developing fruit. And usually blossom end rot happens when the tomato is just like, I'm really tired, man. I'm doing so much at once right now. I just can't bring enough calcium into me to finish the job. So you can help a plant along getting through that by making sure it's well fed and well watered. Some varieties like Roma almost invariably will start off with a few blossom end rotted fruit, and then given time, that will kind of go away. So really, if the vast majority of your fruit are developing, then it is a physiological problem from plant stress. And if you can alleviate that stress, you'll have a very happy plant and you'll have a very happy you, because you will have no more. Now, those blossom end rot fruit are fine genetically. So if you're a seed saver, often I will take those first yucky BER fruit that don't look very appetizing, but I can use those for my seed saving because they're perfectly fine. And if I save seeds from those and plant them next year and the conditions are right, I won't see any blossom end rot. So it's a good use for fruit that are less than lovely early in the season to get your seed saving done from. The benefit of that is the bees haven't visited your plants yet. So you're more likely to get genetically pure seed by focusing on your first clusters of tomatoes on your plants for seed saving. So there's 3 answers in one for you.
Well, we've got a bunch of questions,
Yeah.
and so I'm going to make sure we get through
Yeah,
them in the limited time that we've got
sure.
left. So another attendee wants to know if you could explain some causes of leaf curl.
So leaf curl can be physiological, and it can be genetic, and it can be caused by critters. So the easiest one to solve, aphids or other sucking insects chewing on the stem the leaf's attached to, or the back of the leaf, will cause the leaf to curl. And that's easy to find. Just turn the leaf over, look in the backside, and try to find if there's any little insect sucking. And the best thing to do if you've got aphids is just wash them off with water. They leave kind of a sweet residue, or let nature take its course. Lady beetles will come in and eat them. Certain varieties like Russo Sicilian, Costaludo Genovese, even Black Crim just have a genetic tendency to curl their leaves, and it's fine. If it's really hot all of a sudden, if the plants get really dry all of a sudden, it can cause a leaf curl, and that's the physiological. It means it's conditions, not a problem with the plant. It's very rare that a disease will cause a leaf curl. So I'd focus on those first 3 things first, and then, see where you get to after that. And I'm always available for people sending pictures to me with a picture of a leaf or a picture of something. And when I get an email, I'll answer it pretty much within 24 hours. So.
Okay, perfect. So another attendee would like to know how you separate your seedlings with minimum damage, since you do that.
Yeah. I can do 250 an hour. And here's how: one hand. If you use a nice fluffy soilless mix, all you need to do is pop them out and you press, and they just kind of come apart. And because tomato seedlings reroot so readily, it's invariable you'll break a few little roots off. But you plant them deep and water them and ease them into the sun, and you can have a 99 to 100% success rate. It just takes a gentle hand. And if people go to my website and look at a pull down menu, I'm not sure if it's called resources, but I've got videos I did a video series of how I start my seeds and how I transplant. And that will take people through. I mean, they're kind of crudely, I'm actually doing it in one hand. I'm holding the camera and transplanting with the other, but people get the picture of exactly how it works. You can even break the root off a seedling by mistake, tuck it deeply into dirt, put it under grow light. So within a week, it will reroot and your plant will be fine. So I think the thing is, don't worry. Tomato seedlings are extremely resilient and extremely tough. I sometimes wonder gardeners have more problems because they're not using enough tough love on them, getting a breeze on them. The other night I had all of my seedlings on. It was 33 degrees. It wasn't supposed to be. I freaked out. It's supposed to be 38. I got up, looked at them. they're all fine. So 32 is the magic number. Watch your microclimates. If the weatherman says this, your yard may do this. So be really careful. But I've also had my seedlings out at 28 degrees with a double layer of floating row cover, and they've been fine because that allowed for the warmth escaping from the ground to create a nice little 5-degree elevated atmosphere where the seedlings are. Take some chances. Don't take chances on a large scale, but try different things and see where it gets you. But anyway, next question. Lightning
Okay.
round.
Well, it's going to be because it's we've got
Yeah.
about 15 minutes left, and
No
we're
sweat.
coming up with a bunch of questions. And I did post your website in
Great.
the Q&A so people can get to that because there's a lot of information on there. Could you share how you amend soil for tomato plants that are purchased from the store?
Good soil, if it drains well, if it has compost mixed in with it, work in some peat moss. But I think tomatoes from the store can be fine. Look at them, make sure they're in good, healthy condition. Look for like aphids and things. But if your garden it has good soil, it's probably good to have an initial soil test done to see if you're lacking anything. If you can't get to doing that, it can't hurt by just amending that soil with just a bag of potting mix and a little bit of cow manure or some other compost, and just go for it. Plant it nice and deep. Tomato plants are not that fussy. The big things to watch out for is if they're too basic, in which case you'd use a little sulfur to acidify it, or too acidic, because that can also be a lead to blossom end rot because calcium uptake is inhibited, in which case you could just add a little pelletized lime. But if your soil grows other things well, take your tomato plants home from the store, get them in there, and they'll probably do well, and just feed them and water them throughout the season. Stand back and enjoy.
Okay. So I'm bunching some questions because
Yep.
there are a couple people who had some questions. So I'm not necessarily, folks, I'm not necessarily taking things in the exact order in which the questions are answered. So bear with us. I do have one question I'd like to get out of the way really quickly, though. One of the attendees would like to know if the PowerPoint could be printed, like made available in a PDF or something that could be sent, or not, because they're going to have access to the
Right.
video. So I
Yeah,
don't know what your thoughts
there's
are
so,
on the
yeah, there's so
PowerPoint.
much the photographers from the book and story and stuff probably not going to do the slides. What I could do is there's charts and lists of tomatoes and things like this. What I could do is send a PowerPoint where the pictures have been taken out and the words are in, and I'm happy to send that to you. And
Yeah,
you'll have the video to watch for a period of time as well.
because we had that issue on a couple of other things.
Yes.
There are some copyright issues. So,
Yep.
but I wanted to just check with you.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
we've had a couple of questions. They weren't questions. There were comments about the short growing season, and that you remember from the poll, the
Right.
short growing season was the biggest challenge. And we had
Yep.
several
Yep.
people who didn't ask a question about that,
Yeah. Yep.
comment about that. And I believe, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, you addressed a lot of those issues with
Yeah.
the walls of water, the row cover,
Yep.
and those sorts of things. So
I'll say a few other things to that too. Get your plants as big as you can before you get them out. Get them into warm soil. So even if you were to pot them up into like a 2-gallon pot, dig a big hole, because the more work you do indoors um, under controlled situations, they'll hit the ground running. Just make sure they're hardened off. But you're trying to cheat as best as possible to take advantage of that limited good weather that you're going to have. Warm soil, big plants, and just good care, and just hope for the best, and stick with the varieties that have the shortest maturity date. So, I did say that the days to maturity are pretty unreliable, but look for the words early. And, people feel free to email me back and quiz me more about that, because I can't share everything I know in an hour and 10 minutes, but I tried to do the best I could. But I'm happy to kind of take tangents on some of these questions over email, and then you can share them with the group. I can make sure that Vicki and Janet get those answers if there's some really good stuff in there.
two other things on that. For those of you who are still on, the Master Gardeners do have row cover for sale at the Extension office that you can use for your coverings for your containers or your raised beds or even in the ground. And the general rule of thumb in our region is whatever the dates to maturity are on the seed packets, add 14 more
Right.
days.
Yep.
And that's because of that,
Yes.
the fluctuations in our day to nighttime
Yeah.
temperatures.
I think creating microclimates too, because sometimes people will shade a plant to cool it off, but you could also put up a shade to keep the heat around it. It just to try to create that you're trying to make the plant as warm as possible, because degree days are what are going to really influence the maturity dates of these tomatoes.
Okay, one question from Susan, and I'm thinking maybe you could send us the information that was in some of the slides that we can send out to our attendees in an email. You mentioned favorite places for ordering, and people, and this was also upvoted by others, that several people would like to know what your favorite places are for
Yeah.
ordering. So if you could
Yeah.
send something then for those
Yeah.
people who asked about that, then we can get that out to them.
And let me say about that, I don't like to bash any seed companies, but I do have seed companies I don't care for because they're not honest to my view. So I will tell people what I like, and people can infer anything they want from what I don't include.
And
You
Greg, if
can't go, yeah, you can't go wrong with Victory, Southern Exposure, Seed Savers Exchange. Those three are like, and Johnny's. So those are like my four number ones.
if there is just, I want to throw in that if there's
Yeah.
we're going to send out this recording and these
Mm.
links probably in 2 days. So if there's more information that you want to get out, I do have everyone's email address and I can
Good.
send a big email blast to everybody.
Yep.
Okay. Just a couple more questions, and this next question has several parts to it, so bear with me. Maureen wants to know if you have strong opinions on either staking or caging your tomatoes. Which do you prefer? That's part one. And can you speak a moment on topping your
Yeah.
tomatoes?
Good.
Part two.
Staking is a way to plant more varieties close together, and you will get probably earlier maturing tomatoes because you can prune away to where you've only got one or two leads. Caging will probably extend the maturity dates of your tomatoes a little bit because you get a lot of growth going on. I think it's all about how many varieties you want to grow. Caging, if you're in a really warm area, is how you get your monster yields. Staking also is a way to avoid some diseases because you can keep the plant more airy. You're removing some of the foliage with the suckers. I'm a staker because I like to grow lots of varieties. I love variety. If I had the land, I would cage and just get, 50 pounds off a plant. So that was part one. And Florida weave, cattle panels, just stakes. I use twine to tie the plants to the stakes. Put 100 gardeners in a room and they're going to have 100 different ways of doing this. So, and the second part of the question was?
The second part of that question was, give me 2 seconds. I got to get.
I should remember, this is age showing here,
No. Can you speak a moment about topping?
Topping. So topping is how to avoid, just 1 second. Hey, Sue, is something burning? Okay. My wife is cooking dinner and I smelled something that I'm not supposed to smell. And I'm thinking, oh no, she's making tomato bisque out of our canned tomatoes. We canned 63 quarts last year. So topping, a lot of gardeners, I think, have had this happen. You get a 6-foot stake. All of a sudden the plant's at 6 feet. You don't have the nerve to cut off any. So it goes up, it goes over, it goes down, it bends over, it breaks the stake during a thunderstorm. It's just inefficient. And a lot of times, all that excess growth, you're not going to ripen the tomatoes on it anyway. So what I've started doing now is when the plant reaches the top of the support that I'm using, I just snip it. And then if you want to increase your yield, you do that by letting additional suckers develop. So, one 8-foot plant would have the same yield as if you had, with all the suckers removed, would have the same yield as a 4-foot plant that just had the central stem and one sucker growing beside it. So you can use suckers to increase the yields of your plants. If you prune every sucker off a 6-foot plant, you'll have yield X. If you let one sucker grow, you'll have yield 2X. And if you let a second sucker grow, you'll have yield 2x. So it's a way to increase your yield. You just have more stuff then to tie to that stake or support or weave. But yeah, plants don't mind. Just chop it off. You know, you have to hold your breath. We don't like to cut away healthy plant tissue, but it works. So.
Okay, there's also a question from another attendee, just simply asking, what do you think of Epsom salt?
I've never done the controlled study to prove to myself what it does. So to answer that question for my liking, I would take 2 Cherokee Purple side by side, treat one normally, and just add Epsom salts to it. Document its growth, its performance, its fruiting, its yield, and at the end of the year, I will be able to tell myself, Epsom salts did this beneficial thing to the plant. I've not yet seen, it tends to be a folklore-ish type of thing that people add. It's magnesium. Magnesium is a micronutrient to keep the foliage healthy, but it doesn't do anything for calcium, which is blossom end rot material. So I don't know yet. And I keep trying to do, I'm a scientist. I keep trying to do the experiment. Gardening gets too busy and I lose control of it. And I don't have the discipline to go and do everything the same. So if anybody wants to run that experiment, let me know how it turns out. It can't hurt, but what I don't know is how much it helps.
Got it. So since you showed some slides,
Mm.
there was Karen had been interested in what types of bales that you were using for your bale gardening, and she
Yeah.
did go to your website and she sent an answer in the Q&A that she got the answer to her question on your website. But
Good. Yeah.
could you just do a
Yeah.
real quick rundown? What are you using for that, and
Right.
you
Yep.
know, where people can get
Yeah.
info?
Wheat straw, if you can find it. Alfalfa and buckwheat and oats are fine. Just avoid pine and avoid hay. Hay are just very thin grasses that are, you know, balled up or baled. The problem with grasses is they break down too quick. So a wheat straw bale will keep its integrity throughout the growing season, where a hay bale will break down so fast you'll end up with a pancake with a plant in it. You know, and I pay the COVID drove the price out. So but it may be more expensive where you are. We're paying $8 for a wheat straw bale. I don't know, but you get like perfect compost to use the following season, because that's what it turns into, is black gold that you can then use in your gardens going forward. So, you know, give it a try. And if anybody who wants to know more about it, I think I sent that link to you to post, which is the one in the Gardener's Supply. Yes.
And I posted, that's
Good.
all the Q&A, folks, where you could get the straw bale
Cool.
gardening information. Okay, one last question's come in, and this is going to be the last one, I think, because we're getting pretty close to the end here. And Karen wants to know, I think with regard to the blossom end rot, do eggshells help?
So an eggshell, if you put it in your compost bin in 2 or 3 years, you'll probably still see the eggshell. So the thing is, eggshells break down so slowly. They're wonderful for the structure. So put eggshells in your compost, but their contribution to adding calcium is going to be extremely slow and extremely minimal. But that's perfectly okay, because no doubt calcium is a micronutrient, and there's more of it out there in your good soil in your compost than you realize. So it's typically not that much of a problem, but it's a great thing to do. We get our eggs from the guy in the back, and our compost is loaded with eggshells.
Okay, so
Mm,
Craig, I'm going to stop sharing your screen. I'm going to do that automatically.
okay.
I'm going to go ahead and share mine because I would like to thank people for coming today, and thank you, Craig, for joining us from North
Yeah.
Carolina. I know it's dinner time there. And for those of you who are still on, the recording will be available shortly. The gal who's the other person on this is the person who would make that magic happen. And so thanks to her, and all of the things the links that we posted in the Q&A, those are all going to be also sent to you. And if you've got any questions, you've got Craig's email, you've got his Instagram handle, you've got all kinds of ways to reach him. And when we're finished, please don't forget to fill out our survey because your feedback is really important to us. And we've been doing these webinars for over 30 years. And our main goal is to make sure that we bring you things and subjects that are going to be helpful and interesting to you. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I am going to say thanks to everybody and enjoy the rest of your day. And Craig, thanks to you. And I will be in touch sometime later this week. So
That sounds great.
have a wonderful day. And
Yeah.
my
Everybody let me know how your gardens do. I can't wait to hear if you incorporate any of these things and if you have success. I love to hear people's stories.
I took screenshots. I'm going
Good,
to.
good. All right, guys.
Thank you so much, Craig, and thank you everybody for attending.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.